Yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Unfucking Your CX. I am your host, Zach Hamilton, but no one gives a shit about me. You are all curious about my guest, Ray Riley. Ray and I met a couple years ago. Both of us have a passion for retail. We have a passion for not just retail, but customer and employee experience and how to mobilize the front line. Because ultimately, I am a firm believer in your frontline experience is your brand's experience, especially for those customers who are visiting your store. So, Ray, welcome to the hot seat, man.
Yeah, great to be here, Zach.
I love to start out with this question. Quite frankly, the podcast is all about, what's one topic that makes us cringe? And so typically these moments come up with two colleagues or two buds like us, just in a casual setting. So I'm curious, where's that casual setting? Is it your favorite pub, coffee shop, restaurant? Hell, we doing it over
Yeah.
a walk. Like, what is it, dude?
Yeah. Well, hey, it's a Friday. Maybe we're at a nice cocktail lounge. It's, getting to be happy hour, maybe an espresso martini in hand. And, we're debriefing after a long day.
Yeah. So you love an espresso martini, huh?
Yeah, it's a great start.
It is a good start. I'll tell you what's always been my favorite has been I have a taste bud for Grey Goose,
Mm,
but I don't like it just straight on the rocks. So I always just have like a splash of lemon, so like a lemon drop martini.
there you go. Yeah. Yeah. It's good.
Here
Whatever
we
works
go.
for you.
We're gonna
Love it.
get loosened up just a little bit. It's a nice setting, and you're where? You're up in Chicago, right?
Yeah, I'm in West Town, close to West Loop.
That's
So,
right. That's good.
yeah.
So it's gonna be a good environment, good vibe. Now, Ray, you've worked with I don't even know, hundreds of retailers, kind of like myself. And you're in conversations every single day. You're helping them solve problems. You're working with CEOs like me who are really just fighting for their jobs quarter to quarter, right? And so you're in so many conversations. What is one topic that comes up over and over and over again that makes you cringe and you just want to unfuck once and for all?
Yeah, there's definitely a few. One that I've been hearing a little bit more recently and concerns me as a former retail operator and a guy, running a vendor solution is, oh, we're investing in mystery shopping. Where, we really need to get an understanding of what's happening in our stores, and therefore we're going to invest in that type of service. It makes me cringe.
Mystery shopping, dude. Like, hello, the 90s are calling. What's so interesting is when you say mystery shopping, I want to unpack this a little bit of why it always makes you cringe. For me, like when I first started leading the customer experience strategy at Aaron's, our store operators, from store managers to our regional multi-unit leader managers to our divisional vice presidents, they used to always give feedback of, well, this feedback just can't be right.
Mm,
Are we only talking to the customers who are paying us late, or are we talking to the customers who are paying us on time and who've been customers with us for, 20 plus years because they would give us all the good feedback. And so, I used to have that conversation of, look, we're talking to all of them. And here we are. We have 20-year-old customers who have paid us over $50,000 for customer lifetime value and they're still having a bad experience. And so to your point, we actually ran a mystery shop pilot. I think it was like 120 stores. I can't remember because the CEO wanted to validate our voice of customer.
mm.
And Ray, it was cool, right? Like we got some video feedback before video feedback was really an option, right? And so we had, I think it was over 500 kind of data points and samples because they basically did 5 mystery shops over the course of 60 days for each one of these locations.
Yeah, well,
But no, we didn't do anything with it. And we
yeah,
didn't continue on that. Like we didn't scale the mystery shop.
right,
And
right.
so like I'm curious, like this is a topic that you're passionate about. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, and maybe it would help too if I contextualize, like, in a big box environment, mystery shopping means different things to different people. So we're not talking about, inspecting planograms or sort of the big box. We're talking more specialty retail, customer journey, sales process, that form of mystery shopping that's quite prevalent. And it's not to disparage any of those vendors, but I think that, I remember actually having this conversation with a retail CEO in Australia that took a chain from 3 stores to 300 plus, a $500 million market cap, pretty experienced guy. And, I remember just asking him casually, are you looking at any solutions for that? I'm hearing this more and more. I'm curious your take. And he just looked at me quite sheepishly and said, we like to think we have our finger on the pulse of what's going on in our stores. And it was not an arrogant statement. I think that it's a statement of confidence. It's a statement of structure. And, in my experience, whenever we're talking to a chain, and this is a topic, which seems to be maybe happening more and more, they also, via discovery, have the weakest training infrastructure. They have literally very little established. And so I find those two things, the correlation between those two things, to be quite interesting. You want to evaluate behavior in your store that you're not doing anything to enable, empower, or enforce. And so it's sort of like, if I'm eating McDonald's and KFC every single day, do I, and I do that for 2 years, do I need to go get a physical? I mean, I should have a pretty good idea of what my markers are going to be, health wise.
I was gonna say your arteries are probably screaming at you.
Yeah, yeah.
But you bring up a really good point here, and quite frankly, I love this because you're kind of picking a fight with L&D. But as an enablement pro myself, if I think about, and look, I'm not shitting on mystery shopping, right? They can come in very, very valuable, and I'm sure there's going to be some mystery shopping experts. I can think of one right now who I know I'm going to get a DM from, which is cool. But if I think about mystery shopping, again, it is slow, right? And so ultimately, if you think about consumer behavior today, they don't want you to close the loop 3 or 4 days later, 1 day later, a week later, right? After you've been able to look at their feedback and then try and resolve the issue. At that point, they've essentially moved on. They essentially want you to pattern interrupt. They want you to understand what their behavior is, pattern interrupt in the moment, essentially resolve the issue while they're in your store and create that better experience. And so ultimately, when you think about where consumer behavior is and where it's going, we're not just moving fast, right? Like we've accelerated essentially what we want and what we expect. And so when you think about the front line, right now, the front line is peril to essentially the systems that are built within the organization.
Right.
They can only react as quick as that mystery shopping data gets plumbed back into the system. So this brings up
And there's so many other factors there, Zach, not to interrupt, but is the store understaffed that day? Well,
oh, yeah.
is that a customer experience issue as an outcome? Yes, but that's not the cause of the problem. And so I just find, get the basics, get the fundamentals solid, and then maybe let's benchmark how we're doing. But to just abandon that and measure, it just doesn't make sense to me.
That's such a great point. There's so many things that you could tap into. Ray, if we think about it, let's start with your player tips, right? I'm sure there's some listeners right now, some store operators who are like, oh my gosh, we're going through this exact same thing. What's your first player tip to really mobilize and enable the front line in real time and not lagging, through kind of mystery shopping reports or even voice of customer data, right? Because that's lagging as well.
Yeah. I think, there's this all largely stems from training. And unfortunately, in so many organizations, training is a reactive exercise. And so we get the bad Google review, we get the bad voice of the customer report, mystery shop. Oh, we should invest in this. And that's also plagued because what's being propped up in those reports might not actually be the real problem you need to actually solve. And so I personally like to just take it back to stage zero and how are employees onboarded and trained from day one in the role. From the hundreds of retailers we've spoken with over the years, for over half of them, they self-admit that this is an organic, very loose, unstructured experience. And so if that's how we're bringing people in, how do we expect them to understand, the organization's mission, values, policies, procedures, ways of working with the customer, all these things, if it's so weak to begin with. So that's where I honestly, like, every conversation we have with a retailer, that's one of the initial discovery questions we'll ask is, how do you go about this? And more often than not, that's the answer.
You bring up such a great point because I saw this even when I was in operations at Aaron's. The training program that I went through when I first onboarded in operations was completely different than what the role was. And some of the LMS courses were years old.
Sure.
Right? And so as the brand was evolving, and look, no slack to our L&D team, incredible team. Again, they were trying to keep pace with the change of the organization, the evolution of the organization. And so the other piece of that was as we stood up our employee experience strategy and we started to get feedback from our frontline, they were just commenting on the same thing that you were commenting on. Hey, I'm going through this LMS training, which is knowledge transfer, but my manager never works with me to ensure that I even develop that into a specific skill.
Hmm.
But yet I'm performance managed on the skill and not my knowledge.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, building on what you're saying as well, let's say they do have that initial orientation experience, whatever you want to call it, employee induction. For more than half of retailers, that's also where it stops. So there is no ongoing training and development. The store managers aren't getting the tools or the skills to
Yeah.
do just what you're mentioning. How do I actually extract and enhance, the skills that are present with my team? How do I develop those? That's missing. And I think, I agree with you. This isn't taking any shots at L&D. I think retail L&D. I mean, it's retail's the industry I spent my entire career in, so I don't have a lot of exposure to other industries, but I do think retail is one of those industries where L&D has a pretty challenging role in the sense that, one, they're typically reporting to HR, which is, from an organizational structure perspective, I don't think the most effective. And for the main reason that most retail organizations, the super majority of headcount sits in the stores.
Uh, Dude, is this your player tip number 2 on where this
I
should sit?
guess, yeah, it could be. I don't have.
This
I'm just freestyling. I don't have any
this is great. No, I
defined
love
tips,
it.
but
I love this. So player tip number 2, I
get your
love
org
it.
structure right.
Get your org structure right. It's so spot on because here's the other piece too, right? Where it's as operational leaders, and I was an operational leader at one point, again, we were performance managed on the skill set. And so ultimately, there was always a significant disconnect on what L&D was investing their time in and prioritizing and what operationally we needed
Mm.
because they were essentially working in silos. I would even say get your org structure right. Employee experience strategy should not sit with the HR leader either.
I couldn't agree more. I think HR has so many, and to give credit to HR, they have
And
so
we're
much
not
stuff
passing
on.
HR
Yeah,
folks either.
exactly. They have so much on their plate: people, benefits, HR, payroll. Like, I mean, it's a very significant role. It's only gotten harder. And again, I think to your point about that disconnect, I remember we were talking to a chain. They've got about 200 stores, apparel and fashion, and the VP retail was lamenting in private with me about the content that L&D was putting out. And this is just feedback for, I think, the broader retail L&D community. You know, retail L&D usually comes from one of two places. They either come from an institutionalized L&D background where they've worked outside of retail and they try to bring that corporate approach into retail, but the problem is it doesn't jive with stores. Or secondly, there's sort of the homegrown version that comes out of the stores but lacks the technical chops and background of designing meaningful training and development. So it's a very difficult paradox there, you know?
Yeah, dude, I totally get it. And what I love about player tip number 2 of getting your org right is I don't think there's any better time than to do it right now
Mm.
if you haven't done it yet. right? Because ultimately, if you think about the most iconic retail brands out there who continuously are the consumer's brand of choice, no matter what, and they will pay absolute premium for a product or service with them and ultimately stand the time of market pressures. I'm going to say, I'm not going to say recession. I'm going to say market pressures
Hmm.
are the ones who they build outside in. And when I think about outside, of course, is your customer. So they're always thinking about how do we build for our customer, by our customer. And then that next layer from outside in, especially in retail, is your employee,
Hmm.
your frontline employee who's responsible for delivering on that brand promise. And when your brand promise breaks down, ultimately with customer experience, you are measuring how well operationally those frontline employees are delivering on customer expectations that you promised as a brand.
Absolutely.
And so there's no better time than to do it now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe this is player tip three. I don't know, but
It's
um,
player tip three. Let's go
a,
there.
AI, likely for your organization, AI is not the answer. That's probably that would be my player tip three. And we're dealing with this a lot with some clients at the moment that, to be totally transparent, they don't have the infrastructure set up to be able to leverage AI in the first place. They don't have their documentation, their source of truth. And so they want to leapfrog from not even really a Web 1.0 existence to, AI, LLMs, all this stuff. It's like, can we get your employees onboarded and developed properly first? Can we stop thinking that HR needs to evaluate an LMS, a 30-year-old category of technology, and then retail ops needs to evaluate something on the workforce management side, but you guys aren't talking to each other and looking for a holistic solution that's going to meet the needs of your workforce today, let alone in 12 months. So, like, that's where I think, again, that's org structure issues. That's also, technology sourcing issues. It's communication. It's all these things.
You just gave me a belly chuckle because everyone like AI has become like this new buzzword, like NPS was like back in the day, right? And so every CEO wanted an NPS score because their golf buddies were talking about their NPS and they didn't want to show up this next time without an NPS score. And so I think about that when it comes to AI. Like, look, don't get me wrong. I am an embracer of AI. Quite frankly, I use AI every single day,
Absolutely. Same here.
right? But what I will tell you is, man, it's such a learning curve, right? And
Massively.
I am built like we are building new.
And we're not talking about Chat GPT here. Like, we're talking, yeah, like, just for the audience, like,
Well,
we're
hell, just from Chat GPT to actually build a prompt that actually
proper
returns what you
prompt,
want.
100%.
Like, come on now, right? But I find this of, hey, we're just going to use AI to help us streamline, drive operational efficiencies. And look, the AI output is only going to be as good as the input. Right. And what I also say too is if you think about your front line in a retail store, sure, you can you could speed things up with AI. You can have AI suggest things on what actions to take. But if they don't have the skill set to
Mm,
take that specific action, guess what the output's going to be?
right. Absolutely. Yeah, or if they don't have the skill set to even be able to interpret the recommended action or be able to validate, like, all of these things, I think that, human beings, we're wired to sometimes find shortcuts and look for silver bullets.
Yeah.
We've been using AI video generation since, 2022. It's and this is just one example, I think, with some clients where, they think you can just copy and paste
Yes.
and then all of a sudden you get this amazing generative piece of work. The editing, the refining, the polishing that takes place is tremendous, and I just think that get your foundations right before you start trying to you know uh, apply the hammer of AI to everything that looks like a nail.
Amen. Right. And ultimately, if you think about the front lines, AI is not there to, um, or even robots for that matter, replace your front line because human to human connection is still extremely powerful when you think about building brand loyalty and brand connection. Like it won't replace that, or at least now, but AI is there to help your front line to be more efficient and productive in their roles, right?
Absolutely.
Them with things to do. But going back to your point, if they don't have the skill set to even take that specific action, on either they'll ignore it because they don't know how to do it. They will attempt to do it, and no fault to their own, it'll create a negative friction with that customer because they won't meet customer expectations. And so now you're going to performance manage them out of the business, and it's only your fault because you didn't equip them with that specific skill set. Or you're going to lose really good talent because that talent's going to say, you're asking me to do the job that you've never even equipped me really to do. So I'm going to go somewhere else. And so you'll continuously just create this talent problem on the front line that it doesn't seem like any retailer can solve, but they're only creating this talent friction loop themselves.
That's a great point. And on the equipping front that you're mentioning, I think what's so interesting about retail and the workforce is what the skills that the retail workforce has disproportionately to any other, B2B environment or anything like that are what, people call soft skills. It's the ability to, engage and connect with customers. I mean, that's what makes retail employees, so dynamic and so attractive to other industries. As a corollary to that, I mean, you and I go to a bunch of trade shows. I mean, you see the soft skills of some of these people at these tech companies at their booths. It's just it's shocking, right? It was like they're selling sometimes retail tech. They could never work in a retail store, because so I always find that very interesting that, okay, so this is the strength of retailers. Well, the other side of that coin is that because of the nature of that work, they're not given a lot of that technical training or technical chops, and so you've got to balance that out. You just have to. If corporate employees are getting balanced out with the soft skills training, you need to balance out the that deficiency in your front line.
Yeah, it's so spot on, man. And I think this all just kind of ties back to mystery shopping is not going to improve your training program, right? And I think because that's the one thing that you've been cringing about is, hey, I'm just going to get mystery shopping, and it's going to help us improve the things that we need to improve, like our sales effectiveness model or whatever it may be. And again, a mystery shop is only going to be a data input, a signal input. It is what you do with that input. And quite frankly, like you laid out in your player tips, if the training and development team is not serving the true purpose of the store operations and are aligned and properly orged,
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference of opinion on what the output's going to be with that signal input. And then, quite frankly, if you're not continuously upskilling your employees and have a true frontline coaching capability within your organization, you're just going to continue this cycle of a talent management challenge.
And just as proof, we have a several hundred store chain client that I think they said in the last 2 years they reorged training and development under retail ops, and they've been flying ever since. So if that's not enough anecdotal evidence, I just think that that's proof in the pudding.
Yeah, and look, and then ultimately the way that this ties back to the customer experience is, again, it goes back to your frontline experience is your brand's experience, because they can't give what they don't have. They can't deliver what they don't know how to do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's ultimately the customer experience that as a brand you're trying to create.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. If there's not clarity in their role and the expectations of that role, your expectations and your mystery shopping outcomes, I wouldn't have very high hopes.
That's right. Well, Ray, this has been awesome, man. I know we went a little bit longer than what we typically do, but you were just spitting fire and some gold nuggets in here. So, dude, thank you for coming in the hot seat. Come back again.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Appreciate the opportunity, Zach.
Ray, I'm sure our listeners, if they want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah. LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn, Twitter, Riley Retail or X, whatever it's called now. And then progressretail.com is the company.
Very cool. All right, man. Come back soon.
All right.
Cheers.
See you, Zach.